Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Language Arts Gallery. Today, we're going to continue talking about creative writing, and we're going to talk about writing a haiku. So we're going to look at several different mentor texts and how we can use the skills that we've learned in our previous video, talking about figurative language and talking about different types of poetry and how we can apply them to create our own haiku. So let's get started. So in our last video, we talked about the different types of poetry. And one of the types of poetry that we talked about was haiku. Haiku is a lot of fun to write. It's really fun to write with young learners, but it's also fun to write with students all the way up through university and to adult learners. So when I teach haiku, the first thing I do is I want my students to remember that there's a structure that needs to be followed for this poem. Haiku is an old form of Japanese poetry with 3 lines. The first line has 5 syllables. The second line has 7 syllables. And the final line has 5 syllables. Now, it can never deviate from this structure. Every haiku poem needs to have 3 lines with the 5-7-5 syllable structure. So this is really great for teaching young learners. It's really great for English language learners. It can be a tool to not only teach syllables, but also teach pronunciation. So very often haiku is written about things that we observe in nature, but not always. Occasionally, we come across haiku that I've come across some poems that are even funny. We talked about limericks being humorous poems. I've read haiku that are meant to be funny. But most haiku is meant to invoke an emotional response about something that we observe in nature. So let's take a look here. This is a poem by Matsuo Basho, who is a Japanese poet. He's a haiku master. And this poem says, "An old silent pond. A frog jumps into the pond. Splash! Silence again." So he uses sensory language here, and he creates imagery for the reader. So one of the things that he does where he's using sensory language is this word splash. We can picture that sound. And that's what's called onomatopoeia, words that sound like the sound that they create in real life. And we're going to take a moment and we're gonna look at other examples of onomatopoeia and how you can use that in your haiku. But the thing that's interesting about this poem is this sudden splash is set against a very silent scene in nature. So you've got this silence, then you've got a great splash, then you've got silence again. And that's what's called juxtaposition. We've got two contrasting elements of nature placed side by side with one another. And I think if we think back to things we've observed in nature, we probably all observed things like this, where we've seen a very silent, peaceful scene, and then an animal will do something to disrupt that silence. So that's just part of nature. And this poet is capturing that here in this haiku, which is really incredible because it's only 3 lines, 17 syllables, and they're able to capture that whole moment. And that's what haiku is all about. So I talked about that word splash being an example of onomatopoeia. So onomatopoeia is, as I said, words that mimic their actual sounds. And we've got some examples of those here. Clack, cluck, honk, bang, thud, pop, sizzle, hiss, bah, buzz, moo, chirp, clang, and beat. So there are really countless examples of onomatopoeia. And poets can use this in their haiku to communicate to their reader what's happening at that particular time, what they're observing in nature. And that's a great way to create imagery for the reader. So let's take a look at another poem here. Leaves swirl like dancers, whirling in the autumn breeze. graceful, free, and bright. So here, the author is comparing these leaves to dancers. So that's a simile. He uses the word like to compare the leaves to dancers. But he's also talking about the leaves twirling around. Now, people can twirl around. Leaves don't have the choice to twirl around. So he's giving those leaves human qualities. That's called personification. So good writers, great haiku poets, can use figurative language. They can use personification to create that imagery for the reader. Now, for me, this poem is quite different than the previous poem that we read, where we've got that silent, peaceful scene at the pond. This is, to me, there's a lot more energy. It's far more active. Leaves are moving around. They're free. This notion of a chilly, windy autumn day where it's bright, sunny. Perhaps we can go out and do anything we like. So it's quite different than the mood created by that previous poem. This next poem says, "The sky's a canvas, painted in shades of sunset, day's final whisper." I really like this poem. So the author here uses a metaphor. The sky's a canvas. He's not saying it's like a canvas. He says it is a canvas. Your choice of simile and metaphor, it may depend on your ability to make your haiku conform to those constraints of syllables per line. So if you've got too many syllables and you can include the word like or as, you might choose to take one out and use a metaphor instead of a syllable. I love how the author says shades of sunset. So for me, this creates an image of the sky after the sun has set. I live near the beach, and whenever the sun sets over the ocean, the sun's already down, but there are still lots of colors left in the sky. And it's really beautiful. That's what I picture when I read this poem, those shades of sunset. Here, this is a great example of personification in this poem. The author says, "The tired moon yawns wide. Stars blink in sleepy silence. Night whispers to dawn." So fantastic personification, the moon yawning and night whispering. We know those are things that the moon and the night cannot do. Only people can do those things. But really here, this poet is trying to capture the rhythm of nature, how this is something that happens over and over again. Every night as we pass through night and we enter to the new day. So this is something that I always work through when I'm teaching this to my students. I'll go through a YouTube video here where we just observe things in nature. And here we've got a brook or a stream just passing through a forest. And I won't play this, but anything like this is a great way to brainstorm some ideas for a haiku that we might choose to write. So if you choose not to do that, you can go outside. If you've got access to something that's to a natural setting that's close to your home, you can do that instead. So another thing I like to do is after I work through these poems, I think it's important that students who are learning to write haiku work through some of these poems on their own. Look for examples of personification, figurative language, sensory language. Think about what kind of imagery the poet is trying to create with the language that they use. So I've got some mentor texts here. And this is a fantastic graphic organizer to help us brainstorm our own haiku poems. So you can find the link to this lesson in the video description, and you can also find the link to the entire creative writing course in the video description as well. They're both available in my TPT store. For my students from Myanmar, please do not purchase anything. If you need something, please just send me a message in Signal and I will send it to you free of charge. So thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like, subscribe, and comment on the video, and I'll see you in our next video. Where we're gonna continue talking about poetry.